Yes, it's being recorded. And I explained that, I didn't explain it completely well, I think. So first of all, an organization can make products or can deliver services. So if you buy shoes, that's a product. If you rent a movie on Netflix, or that's a service. And if most of the industry, so most of the people in the Netherlands work in the service industry, about 70–80% or so. They work in IT, in the financial sector, in insurance, in higher education, or some in the education sector, in government in general. So they all provide services. So if you innovate in the type of product or service you deliver, it's a product service innovation. Process innovation means your internal organization, which basically means that you deliver a product or service in a new way. For example, if you buy new machines or optimize your process, then you innovate your process so that you can provide the same product cheaper. The confusion started because I used Airbnb and Uber as an example of both product, service and process innovation. Because if you look at what Airbnb does, they offer a service, a new type of service, but they completely change the process of booking apartments or booking hotel rooms as well. So they both innovate in process and in service. Yeah, Apple is product service innovation, right? Yes. So if you, depends on what aspect of Apple you focus on. So if you focus on the machines they make, that's product innovation. If you focus on the services they deliver, like iTunes, etc., that's or they quick iTunes, Apple Music, that's service. But they of course also have they have something similar like Airbnb and Uber. They have they also have a platform, the App Store, which is both a service innovation and is a new way of connecting people who make applications and people who buy applications. And they are the platform, so kind of a marketplace. And that's also a process innovation, because that whole new, what you see more and more, those online marketplaces is a kind of a process innovation. But I'll talk more about that in the next lecture when we talk about new business models. Okay, so that's just to clarify that. Then we gave all those examples of those innovations, and we came to innovation typologies. And I explained that you can distinguish between an incremental and a disruptive or radical innovation, in which an incremental is just building upon an innovation that's already there, like a new version of a phone. And a disruptive innovation is providing something completely new, like the first iPhone. It completely disrupted the mobile phone market. And then, if I remember correctly, there were a bunch of questions last week about, okay, but what exactly is disruptive, and what is incremental, and if you, as an organization, have a similar product for a new market, is that then incremental or disruptive? And I think we were that's where we quit the lecture. And that's why we have two different innovation models in our lecture. So not only the simple model from incremental to disruptive, but a model that has a 2x2 model, so with 2 dimensions, which I think is a bit more specific about the different types of innovation that you have. So let me explain that in a moment, because I think I also didn't explain this slide. So this is an explanation of the incremental versus disruptive innovation and the consequences it has for organizations. So if you look at these types of innovation, I remember, so we talked about this slide well. So if you look at this innovation, so disruptive innovation can be disruptive because it focuses on new customers, it identifies completely new needs, because it requires completely new technology, because it requires a completely new process. And an incremental innovation just fits within your existing innovation, probably within your existing customers, etc. And that's where the question arises, okay, but can I have the same customer, but then completely new technology? Or can I have a new customer with the same technology? Yes, you can, but those are, to explain that, we need the other innovation model. So we need this one. So this is an innovation typology that also says, well, on the one hand, you can innovate incrementally. On the other hand, you can innovate in a more disruptive manner. The difference is that they distinguish between markets and customers, as it's also sometimes called value, and between new technology and structures. And sometimes they also call that process, so what you do within your organization. So on the one hand, you can innovate with your existing customers, for example, a new product that's for the same type of customers, or you can try to reach a whole new customer segment with your innovation. On the other hand, you can build upon your existing innovations with existing technologies and with your existing structures in place in the organization. Or you can innovate in a disruptive manner, which means you have to invest in new technology or acquire new technology, or you have to completely redo your organizational process internally, and that's disruptive. So if you combine that, you get 4 different types of, sorry. And so let me get to that later. So you get 4 different types of innovations: niche, regular, architectural, and revolutionary. And let me now get to the question. So is Apple a form of revolutionary? Depends. So if you look at Apple now, if they, for example, introduce a new telephone, then I would say, so the introduction of a new phone, like the iPhone, I don't know where they are, 12 or something like that, that's a regular innovation. That's not much new. You say it has a new camera, the screen has more pixels, whatever, but it's not revolutionary in any sense. It also does not require that much fancy new technology. Yeah, so I would say a new iPhone would be regular. SpaceX reusable rockets is absolutely on the disruptive side of technology and structures, and I'm not really sure about the markets and customers, but I'd say that for now it's revolutionary, because the only client of SpaceX is NASA. NASA, I don't know. So they focus on existing markets, but they want to focus on commercial space flight, so they are trying to disrupt the market as well. So I'd say they're now revolutionary, but they try to be an architectural innovation by focusing on a new customer segment. So is an existing innovation or structure applied on a new market or target group a niche as well? Yeah, that's a niche as well. So if you have an existing innovation to a new target group, that's a niche innovation. So if you try to get all the people to adopt a smartphone, then you try to innovate in a niche market. So the conclusion about the e-bike, I don't know. What do you think? I think it depends on the customer segment. So can someone say what they think of where the e-bike would fit and why. And I also have a moment to think about it. Architectural, revolutionary. And why, Eline, why would that be architectural? And Maureen, why would it be revolutionary? Yeah. So now I'd say it really depends on the market, and I think that's the important part about innovating. The Dutch market would now be regular, other countries might be different, like in Italy it's more architectural. Yeah. Yeah, we discussed it last time, but my memory is failing me. So, and it's also to make the point that what you consider an innovation is not only does really depend on who you have in mind. So it's not just an innovation because it is a new technology or because it's new for you. Something is an innovation only because you have to take into account your customers. So indeed, it's kind of everywhere. So if you look in a new market like Italy, for which like biking on its own is new, then it's maybe more architectural. For the Netherlands, it's regular or maybe a kind of a niche creation because it can also be for new customers like older people. Yeah, so since it focuses on the older people, it's more of a niche, and you'll see that slowly the innovation becomes more regular. So once the innovation is adopted by more and more people, it becomes a more regular innovation. So you get updates to e-bikes. So it depends on the product and the innovation itself, but also on the market to determine where an innovation fits. So that perfectly matches the definition of innovation, of course, because an innovation is something new coupled with an idea of who you want to sell it to. So I think actually a very good example in e-bike because it could fit anywhere depending on who you aim for. So I have a bunch of examples. So for example, the first smartphone, the first tablet was really a breakthrough. So it was an architectural innovation. So a new technology for a new market because customers had to adopt a completely new technology. But if you look at something like this, you now have tablets specifically for children, which are so this is something that really exists. So this is a tablet for children and they can play games. It has a webcam so they can interact in a virtual world with some characters in a kind of interactive cartoon. It also has an app store. So this is using an existing technology, so basically a smartphone or tablet without the phone connection, and applying it to a new niche, so to new customers, children. So this is an example of of something that already exists, a tablet to a new market, a niche. So like we discussed, this is a regular innovation, so an update of a phone, because it's incremental innovation, the same market, not much change in technology. And this is an example of a revolutionary innovation. So if you go from a typewriter to a word processor, that's really revolutionary, but it is focused on the same market. So imagine people. So first, imagine people working office jobs at the end of the 19th century. So they had to do everything by hand, writing. Then suddenly a typewriter was introduced, which is like a really revolutionary innovation. So it's a completely new technology, but it's focused on the exact same market. Then when you got electronic typewriters or word processors for your computer, it's a completely revolutionary technology. The technology itself is completely different from how a typewriter works, but it's still focused on the same market and the same people. So that's an example of a more revolutionary innovation. Okay. So let's then talk about innovation markets. So let's think about what you have to do as an organization in order to stimulate innovation and how an innovation and an organization interact. And this is something that we will talk about more in lectures 5 to 8 or so when we talk about technology and organization. But I also want to focus on it a bit here. So, and that's of course the goal of your business plan. So if you think of your business plan, you have to come up with a new innovation, but you have to also think about the organization. And it's pretty easy to come up with an idea for an innovation, for a new product or service, but it's pretty difficult then to think about, okay, how should we structure the organization if we have a certain type of innovation, and does it even fit in an organization? If you work in a very conservative organization, then maybe a new architectural innovation is not the best organization for it. So if you take these innovations, these different types of innovations, and think about what type of organizations would these innovations best fit in, you get something like this. So if you take an architectural innovation, which is completely which is like new technology, also a new market. And then if you look at what organization do you need in order to make sure this innovation can happen, well, you probably need a kind of more like an organization with a professional structure, with more highly educated people who are kind of flexible with an open culture, and people in the organization who are willing to change, who are willing to turn their existing work around in order to focus on the innovation. So we'll talk about what this exactly means, so what a professional structure and an open culture is in a couple of lectures. But for now, remember that the type of innovation, that the type of organization affects the type of innovation that is most likely to originate from that organization. So on the other hand, if you have a regular innovation, just incrementally, so that's an organization which would best fit a more mechanistic structure, so in which you have clear structures and processes involved, so that if you make minor adjustments, you can just update the manual and say to people, well, this is the update to the software or the update to the machine, which allows us to make a phone with a new camera. So there's not much change required, and it's mostly process based. So it mostly you can fit it into rules and existing processes and ways of working. And the other ones are a bit in between. So for example, a niche innovation focuses on a new market. So you want the people in your organization to be kind of externally oriented. You want them to you want those people to think about, okay, this is our client base, but you want them to be like more salespeople. So, okay, who we also focus on, who also we sell our products to. So for a niche innovation, you would need a kind of an organization that's more externally oriented with people who are also focused on customers. So in short, innovation and the type of organization, of course, interact. Um, and therefore, you see that some organizations are very innovative, other organizations are less innovative. And therefore, it's why you often see things like spin-offs, that an organization is innovative in a certain sense, but then says, oh, well, within our existing organization, we cannot really build the innovation. So therefore, we create another organization which then will focus solely on the innovation. And you see that with Philips, for example, when they make something new, they have a spin-off of Philips that focuses solely on the innovation, or I think with Google as well. So this is an example of from one of the articles in the that you have to read for this lecture. So how could you stimulate innovation in an organization? You don't have to remember this by heart for the exam, of course, because it's just too much. It's just an example of what you need to think about when you want to stimulate innovation in an organization. So you need a culture that encourages creativity. You need kind of a hierarchy in your organization that supports that. So managers that do not micromanage, but managers that support innovation, or that set goals and then let people be free in how they want to accomplish those goals. So you need work group support. So you need differently skilled people. You need to have sufficient funds. You need to have work that is kind of challenging. If you have boring work and work which is kind of repetitive, then most likely there will be hardly innovation in the any innovation in the organization. So basically, you have you need to structure the organization in such a way that you stimulate innovation. You do that by paying attention to every aspect of the organization, from the structure, from the leadership roles, from the cultures in the organization, from how you stimulate the people in the organization, etc. So this is basically the same slide as before, which basically says, well, these are all the factors that affect innovation. Finally, what I find interesting to mention as well is that, of course, when you think about it, then you think, well, as an organization, we should innovate, we should continuously develop new products, because that allows us to, attain new customers and new markets. That allows us to, make more money with new inventions that we can sell to people. But there's always a tension between the organization and innovation, because for an organization, there's always a need to just do what they are doing, so to not innovate. So an organization is a system that runs efficiently, or kind of efficiently. So it has structures, it has procedures, it has a culture, it has people who in the organization who work in the system. And because of that, you always have resistance to innovation. People suddenly don't want to do new things. If you innovate, you have to restructure the organization. So you have to hire new people. You have to relocate to a new building. You have to buy new machines. You have to think about new work structures, etc. So an organization just wants to keep doing what they're doing as efficiently as possible. And if you look at what innovation is, that's basically the other way around. It's thinking of doing new things in new ways, trying out new things. So you need flexibility. So there's often a tension between the organization and innovation. So the organization wants to keep doing what they're doing, innovation wants to do something new. And you always have that. And that's why oftentimes, even in organizations that have come up with something new, it is often difficult to find support for the innovation because people are resistant. And in a couple of other lectures, and in the last lecture, and in the lecture about innovation, technology, and people, we will talk about this a bit more. So we will talk about motivation and structures and how you can convince people to adopt innovations in the organization. But for now, remember that it's not easy to innovate in an organization because you have to deal with existing structures. And that's, of course, why many organizations have specific R&D departments, or they outsource new ideas, or they just buy new innovation from outside the organization. So in order to make them more flexible, regardless of the internal organization. Okay. I just spilled my coffee. Sorry, I'll be right back. Okay, get the rest during the break. Okay, I'm back. Thanks for the support. Okay, sorry, I'm back. The next thing, what was the final part of the previous lecture, was open innovation and crowdsourcing. So if you look at the tension between the organization and innovation, then open innovation and crowdsourcing is kind of a logical solution to stimulating innovation within an existing organization. And it's also something that you see more and more and more in organizations. So why would you stick to your own internal organization when you want to innovate? So this is called the innovation funnel. So it's the prototypical idea of from ideation to innovation. So you have like many ideas, and finally it results in, so you have thousands of ideas, and you have result in several proposals, several prototypes, and from the thousands of ideas, like one or so makes it into an actual product or service. And you can have innovations which are like technology push or market pull. So you can think of new customers and new markets, or you can think of new technologies that you can acquire or invent. But all this is within the organization, or specifically like within mostly the R&D, research and development department. So people in organizations have ideas, they can put them in an ID box, or you can have brainstorm sessions in the R&D department or whatever. And some of these will become an innovation. But it's not really what happens anymore. So that's called the closed innovation model. But nowadays, innovation is way more open. So the boundary of the firm, as you see in the right figure, is dotted, flashed. So there increasingly is communication and interaction between the organization, the outside of the organization. So still a lot happens within the organization, but ideas also come from outside of the organization. For example, customers coming with ideas for innovations, or you acquire innovation from outside. You just buy companies, or you hire people for a short amount of time to work in your organization. So increasingly, or you work together with other organizations to innovate. So increasingly, the boundaries of the firm become less clear. So there's more outside interaction. And also further in the innovation process, you see that it's still not only targeted within the organization. So of course you have innovations within your organization, but as you see on the right side of the figure with new markets, you can also see ideas, popping outside of the organization. So, and that is, spin-offs, or you just sell your innovation to other organizations. And that's kind of the open innovation model. And that's how many organizations currently function. We will talk about that more in the lecture on virtual organizations. Yeah, good question. The open innovation is basically all innovation models are linear. So also, for example, if you I think in this figure that I showed of the innovation process, it's also a linear model, from identification to implementation. And basically all models of the innovation process are linear. Hello? So let me switch back to the sorry. So for this one, this is also a linear model. So innovation and open innovation are linear processes, but it's an ideal type of situation. This never happens. So innovations are not linear at all. So especially from the idea to prototype phase, it's way more circular. So you have ideas, then you have prototypes. It doesn't work at all. You have you start over again. You have new ideas, new prototypes, and then even in commercialization phase, you see, okay, the customers actually do not like what we invented. So you have to go back in the innovation process and come up with something else. So all the models are presented as a linear process because, of course, it always starts with an ID and ends with something concrete, with an innovation that you can market. But in reality, it's way more circular than that. Do you have to know the open innovation model by heart? Yes, but there's not much to know about it. It's just knowing that the innovation does not only happen within the organization. That's it. And that's kind of what open innovation means. So it's not really difficult to remember. So if you just remember, open innovation is more fluid boundaries between the organization and the outside of the organization, that's enough. So basically, by the way, for the exam, you can know things by heart, but you can also kind of deduce things logically. So if you kind of know what open innovation is, and you kind of know what an organization is structured like usually, then these principles, then these are obvious. Then you don't have to know them by heart. So for example, closed innovation, smart people in our field work for us. Open innovation, we must find and tap into knowledge and expertise outside of the company. Kind of makes sense. Now, and also we can have external R&D. We have to think about the market. We have to think about external ideas as well. That all kind of flows logically from just knowing what open innovation is. So for the exam, don't go learning things like this slide by heart, but just try to think logically about, okay, do I know what open innovation is? Can I reason how you have to structure your organization in order to allow for open innovation? And that's usually enough to answer an exam question. Not for everything, some things you just have to learn, and that's it. A think tank. Where is that on the? Is that on the slide? Well, never mind. A think tank is just a bunch of people that you put together and have them think about something. Yeah. So, and it's kind of an interesting example because think tanks used to be like within the organization. It used to be like engineers who worked on who just basically did science. So they work on new types of technologies, and that's a think tank. And then you can just get a few engineers and a few marketeers together and have them think about what can we use those for, and that's a think tank. Basically put a bunch of people together, but you now see that you have think tanks outside of the organization. So you I forgot the word for it, but what you now see often is that they hire a bunch of people, like a bunch of students, and they put them together for like 3 days. And every group of students or group of people have to come up with a new, think of a new word, has to come up with a new innovation. So it's if anyone can help me, what's the name for that? So those events that last a day or a couple of days in which people in groups try. A hackathon. Thanks. Yeah, a hackathon. A hackathon is a think tank, but it's a think tank. It's an open innovation think tank. You hire people from outside the organization or and combine them maybe with people from inside the organization, give them a task, and then hopefully something comes out of it. So that's a hackathon is an open innovation think tank. Thanks. There's like crowdsourcing broadcast search. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's let me go. I'll come to that in the next on I think the next slides. So in 3 slides we have a typology of open innovation, which I think is pretty useful to explain think tanks and naming newborn animals. So crowdsourcing is open innovation. So crowdsourcing is involving potentially everybody in the world to do innovation for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be anyone, but it can also be a selected group of people. But it's basically is having a question that you want to solve, or a challenge for a new innovation, and just putting it out into the world and hoping that the crowd is able to solve it. And open innovation is basically like everything. User innovation is involving your customers. Crowdsourcing is involving not necessarily your customers. And co-creation is basically kind of everything. co-creation can be within your organization, can be a combination of customers and people in your organization, or basically everyone. So open innovation is the all-encompassing category. User innovation is involving your customers in innovation. Crowdsourcing is involving potentially other people than customers in your organization. I don't know what the Tesla Hacker Challenge is. So if you explain that, then maybe I can answer it. Then, but let's go to the next slide and to the typology, so then maybe we can answer it. So crowdsourcing is that you have those official difficult definitions. So represents the act of a company or institution taking a function once performed by employees and outsourcing it to an undefined network of people in the form of an open call. This can take the form of peer production. It's also often around speaking by sole individuals. The crucial prerequisite is the use of open call format in a large network of potential laborers. A very difficult definition, but it basically means that if you look at function once performed by employees, so basically something that you have been doing before, outsourcing, but outsourcing to an undefined network, so an open call, so outsourcing it to the outside of the organization and not necessarily outsourcing it to a specific person. Another definition is an online distributed problem solving and production model, which basically is the same. So problem solving and production, but it's an online distributed, means outside of the organization to potentially more people. Yeah, thanks. Okay, let's get to the Tesla question when we talk about the crowdsourcing time. So basically, what is crowdsourcing? It has an open call, so no or little selection up front. It is to the crowd, so the participants are non-similar, so heterogeneity, which basically means that the call is not only to those and those and those persons, but basically to everyone who wants to participate. Crowdsourcing is also usually voluntary, so delayed and unsure benefits, which basically means it's a game or a competition that someone can win, but most of the people who put effort in it won't win at all. It usually is online. It doesn't necessarily have to be online, but it's not really feasible to do something like that offline. Yeah, you can put it in a newspaper, for example, but online is just way more handy than offline. And crowdsourcing has gained traction. Since I think maybe 15 years or so. And also because I think 10 years ago or so, there was a book called The Wisdom of the Crowds about how people in a group were collectively smarter than individual people. For example, if you would have to guess, my weight, then none of you know how much I weigh, but if all of you give an estimate, then you would see that like the average would kind of be the correct answer. And it turns out that kind of works for those fairly simple tasks, like the weight of a person, or like how it was tested, the weight of a cow. But it doesn't really work for very complex tasks, the whole crowdsourcing idea. So that's why we have specific forms of crowdsourcing now for more specific groups of people that are more beneficial to organizations. So so you have a model that distinguishes between 4 different crowdsourcing types. And I think that's kind of useful to remember, also for the exam, because they, I think, give a good overview of what you see in real life. So, and then let's see where we can put the Tesla hackathon, the Tesla Hackathon Challenge. So first of all, it's knowledge discovery and management is the first type of crowdsourcing. So it's just gathering and processing existing information into something new. So, for example, Wikipedia. So that's really a knowledge discovery and management. It's just asking the crowd to contribute to a project. So writing articles for Wikipedia, but also things like voting on something is also knowledge discovery and management. So just asking the crowd, okay, do you like this picture? Yes or no? So that the most important pictures or discussions pop up. So that, like the Reddit model. So it's just like Reddit is typical knowledge discovery and management. So people can contribute interesting articles or links. Other people can vote, so that you get an overview of the best information within a certain category on Reddit. Also things like Getty Images, which is a website, one of those photo websites, where you can buy photos for whatever your website or for magazines, is also knowledge discovery and management. It's just people, the crowd gathering information and putting it into a central location. And everyone can participate. Also, those fairly simple things that you see in many organizations, like, for example, Dell ID Storm, is also an example of open innovation. I think they quit now, but Dell ID Storm was an open innovation in which people could suggest innovations for Dell, and then other people could vote on it, and Dell promised that, okay, the best ideas, we are going to implement those. So, for example, one of the ideas was to have the same charger for every Dell laptop, which they, I think, still haven't implemented. So that's knowledge discovery and management. The second one is broadcast search. This is completely different because this is also crowdsourcing, because you have a question and you put the question out into the world. But instead of many people who all contribute a little bit of information, you want to find one person or maybe a few persons who are specialists and who can solve the problem for you. So you have those platforms that offer these often challenges, and people can submit a proposal and then one gets chosen. So to give an example, I had a thesis student, a master thesis student, who wrote his thesis on knowledge management in an organization. So how you can stimulate knowledge management in an organization. And he saw a challenge on, I think it was an incentive, for a large organization who requested exactly that. So they wanted to have a plan how they could stimulate knowledge within the knowledge sharing within the organization. So based on his thesis, he wrote a proposal and he won. So he won, I think, 10,000 euros or something like that, for his idea. So I think it's a great example that my students are sometimes very smart, oftentimes very smart. And a good example that they of broadcast search. But it's also for way more complicated things, like oil companies who put out a challenge to find new ways of drilling for oil. People in the medical sector trying to tap into people from other sectors to come up with a solution for a medical problem, etc. So that's 2. So the third one is, it's called peer-vetted creative production. sounds a bit difficult, but it basically means co-creation and voting. So it basically means creating something new with the help of the audience. So this is like this is the typical crowdsourcing idea. So the picture that is shown here is from Abernathy, and anyone who's now from the outside of the Netherlands has no idea what I'm talking about, but it's a new flavor of potato chips that has been submitted via a crowdfunding website. So someone suggested this flavor, and this flavor in the end was chosen within a couple of rounds. So in the first round, people could submit flavors for potato chips, and there was another round in which people could vote on the best flavor, and finally the Abernathy was chosen. So this is basically prototypical crowdfunding. Yeah, you could also taste different chips. Yeah, I think in the end you could first there was the ID stage that people could come up with new flavors. Then I think there was a voting stage. Then they had, I think, 3 flavors out in the stores. You could buy those 3 different types of flavors and then vote on them. And then finally, one of those flavors ended up as a regular product. And it's still, I think it's still there. So it's really like prototypical crowdfunding, prototypical crowdsourcing. So that's peer-vetted creative production. The difference with the first one is that in the first one, in knowledge discovery and management, like everyone can just add a little to the platform, and every information gets added to the platform, and together you build something. And it can also be, so the first one can also contain voting. So the third one, peer-vetted creative production, is not that everyone contributes a little, but that everyone can contribute, and finally one solution is chosen. Okay, so finally the last one is distributed human intelligence tasking, which basically means using the crowd, using us humans to do tasks that computers can't. So for example, if you have to, if you get a pop-up from Google which says, which I had last time, so please indicate all different traffic lights, please click on all crossings, you remember those, then basically you are doing distributed human intelligence tasking, because you are helping an artificial intelligence recognizing objects. So it's not only to identify that you are not a robot, but it's also to help the artificial intelligence in image recognition. So that's distributed human intelligence. And you have more, like CAPTCHA as one example, similar example. Galaxy Zoo asked people from around the world to identify different types of galaxies. Are they spiral or circular? So also things that computers cannot really do. So those are 4 different types of crowdsourcing. And finally, the Tesla Hacker Challenge. They challenge people to hack the system who would hack the new, who would hack the new system would get a job at Tesla and a lot of money. No one was able to hack the complete system in the end. Okay, well, you tell me, what kind of crowdsourcing is this? Yeah, I would also say peer-vetted. It also has a kind of broadcasting. Yeah. So like everything in reality, things are more complex than we can explain with models. So I think the Tesla Hacker Challenge is, on the one hand, a broadcast search, because you want to find someone who can hack into your system and who you can offer a job. On the other hand, you could also see it as peer-vetted creative production, because maybe the original idea of Tesla was not to find a single person to offer them a job, but maybe their goal was to, okay, we just offer someone a job, but our main goal is to get as much input as possible and find out different ways that we can protect and improve our system. And in that way, it's more like peer-vetted creative production. So some person says, well, I try to hack in your system and this is a vulnerability, and someone else says, well, this may be another vulnerability in your system. And then finally, the best one gets chosen. So it is both broadcast and peer-vetted creative production, depending on the ultimate goal of Tesla. Okay. I just realized that this could be, I think, a nice exam question. You know? So I give an example of a crowdsourcing, and it's up to you to define which type of crowdsourcing it is. And then again, of course, the answer on an exam question like that could be, multiple answers could be correct. Depends on your explanation. Okay. That was what I wanted to do for the previous lecture. So it took me half of this lecture. But finally, we can go to lecture 3. But I suggest we first have a 5-minute break before we continue, so I can clean up the rest of my spilled coffee and get a new cup. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. Where am I? Okay. Let's see. So, okay, shall we continue? And shape could use a product for our business plan with a description. It states IT innovation. So we could also use products like a shoe or something. Yeah, that's fine as well. Yeah, because you still have to think about how you're going to market that and what kind of systems you would need in your organization. So that's fine. Okay, let's talk about diffusion of innovation. So what we're going to talk about now is how exactly an innovation is adopted by the market, so by people. So we talked that an innovation can be like new because it is like a new technology. Or the innovation can be new because it focuses on a new market or new customers. So in this lecture, so we talk about those new markets. So we talk about what happens if you have a new technology or new innovation or an existing innovation for a new market. How do those innovations diffuse until everyone, well, actually everyone that you expect the innovation to use and adopt the innovation. And there are different ways of looking at it, and the most well-known one is Rogers' diffusion of innovation model. It's actually basically most well-known. But I also want to explain something about S-curves and Gartner's hype cycle. So let's see the question. So the slides we didn't cover won't be on the exam. Yes, everything will be on the exam, which is in the slides. But the things that I didn't cover yet, I will do that in the lecture on information systems in the organization. It's lecture 8 or something, I think 8. So don't worry, slides that we haven't done yet will be covered in an upcoming lecture. And then in the end, what I will do is just I will, if there are things that I did not discuss, I will just remove them from the slide. So you so then you know what you have to learn and not. Okay. So I want to discuss 3 things: S-curves, Rogers' diffusion of innovation, and Gartner's hype cycle. If we won't make it through the entire lecture, and we probably won't, then we just continue next week. So to start out with S-curves. S-curves explain innovation and explain when you kind of reach the platform of technology and a platform of innovation. So this is an example of an S-curve, and it basically says, so well, if you first start with a new innovation, it takes a lot of effort to get it off the ground. And you have to invest a lot in new ideas, you have to invest a lot in new technologies, but still very few people adopt the innovation. Then once after the innovation has been introduced, it becomes more easy for you as an organization. So it becomes easy to process, a lot of people can adopt it. So you have to put just a little effort in it in order to get a lot of performance benefits. So a lot of people adopting the innovation. And then finally, in order to make the innovation even better, at the end stages of the innovation, it will cost more and more and more effort to innovate. And then you kind of reach the limit of the technology. So to explain that a bit more clear, What effort basically means is time. So there is a difference between effort and time, because you can put in a lot of effort in new technologies in a short amount of time, but it's easier to consider this as time. So the time since inception of the innovation. So think of the smartphone. Improvements in performance due to the innovation. So when a smartphone was introduced, it took a lot of effort to first deliver the innovation. So everything had to be done for the first time. So you have to acquire and work on technologies for the touch screen. You have to think about how to integrate everything that into a single device, which is still manageable. So that's weigh a lot. What about the battery? So it takes a lot of effort to make the first version of the iPhone. So. And there are limited improvements in performance. So because it takes a lot of time for the first version to start. Then suddenly you see that it becomes easier and easier. So the whole production process is ongoing. And it becomes relatively easy to come up with updates in the technology. So the time, so within a relatively short amount of time, you get lots of different innovations. But then after a while, you reach kind of the limit of technology. So it takes more and more effort and more time to come up with improvements in the technology. That's what you see now with the current generation of smartphones. So you see that they have to work a lot and invest a lot probably in again a new camera, again a better screen, but it doesn't really result in much more technological innovation. So we kind of reached the limit of the smartphone technology. So what we have to wait for is like a new technology, a new type of smartphone, like a integration with a smartwatch, integration with virtual reality, or maybe like those flip phones, so that we can have like a new technological S-curve. So an S-curve basically means that with a new technology or with any innovation, the innovation is slow at first. So you have to test it, you have errors in technology and design. So first of all, the innovation takes off slowly. Suddenly, once the technology takes off, you see rapid improvements in the innovation. So you see rapid improvements in technology and also rapid improvements in adoption of the innovation. But once the technology has settled in, it becomes more and more difficult to improve. Besides the iPhone, another thing, I think, example is carbon reduction. So carbon reduction, so if, for example, if we consider factories here in the Netherlands, then when they started carbon reduction, it was hard because we didn't really know how it worked. We didn't really know how we could actually cut carbon reduction in organizations. But now you see that that carbon reduction in industry is relatively easy. So it's just picking the low-hanging fruit, because you can insulate your industrial installations. You can have filters and catalyzers to cut carbon and other materials outside of your out of your exhausts, which is relatively easy, but does result in a lot of carbon reduction. But once you reach that stage, and once you want to cut carbon reduction further, it will take more and more effort. So you will have to invest a lot in new technologies in order to try to cut carbon even further. And then the hope is for some kind of new technology, which allows you to just take carbon directly out of the air or something like that. So that's another example of such an S-curve. So at the beginning of when we now talk about carbon reduction, it's still relatively difficult. Then we see that it becomes easier and easier because we can pick the low-hanging fruit, and then we have to invest lots and lots of new technologies in order to get even more efficiency gains. So like I said, on the x-axis, it's effort versus time. And there is a difference between effort and time, because time sometimes obscures the effort put into the innovation. So I don't know if you know Moore's law, but Moore's law basically, well, I will explain it specifically in another lecture, but Moore's law basically means that the performance of our computers and computer chips like doubles every 18 months. So like every 18 months or so, we have we have double the capacity of computer power. And I'll explain this better for those of you who know what Moore's law is. I'll explain it better in another lecture. So the Moore's law here doesn't look like an S-curve. So it doesn't look like, okay, you have to put in more and more effort to have efficiency gains. But that's not really true. So you see that we are now maybe at the at kind of the top as well, because in time you see that it still doubles. But if you look at the investments that organizations have to make into optimizing computer chips even further, it just costs so much more effort than it did like even 10 years ago. And it costs so much more money that maybe if you look at the computing power, so maybe we are here at the limit of technology, and maybe it's waiting for like a completely new way of making computers to start a new cycle. So, for example, quantum computing or something like that. So why is this useful? Well, it's useful because it allows you as an organization to think about if you want to join a new innovation and when. So these are two types of S-curves. And let me do it without that. So the left one basically means that you have an existing technology, but the technology is not allowed to mature. So because even before the technology has matured, you see a new S-curve with a new technology who can then take over the function of the older technology. On the right-hand side, you see an S-curve in which a new technological innovation only comes up once the existing technology kind of settles in. To give an example, for example, I don't know if you remember the fax machine, but it has been used for like 20 years or so, but it didn't really reach full potential because when the fax machine was about here, we had the internet. So fax machines were like out in no time. You also saw that with like MP3 players or mini disc, so that they weren't allowed to mature because when they were still in the beginning phase of the technology, there was suddenly a new technological innovation, online music or iPods, which took away their market. So for example, on the other hand, if you look at vinyl records versus compact discs, it's more of an S-curve like you see on the right side. So we had vinyl records for, I think, 60 years or so. And then we had the compact disc. But in the meantime, the whole production process of vinyl records was kind of over, so they were you can make them pretty efficiently. So you had record players that worked actually perfectly. So there wasn't much to gain. So actually there was room for a very new improvement, like just compact discs, which brought on like a new technological innovation, which in the end replaced vinyl records for in the end. So how about a tablet and laptop? Which one ripper? I'm not sure. Yeah, so innovations can also, of course, exist right next to each other. So I'm not sure if laptops and tablets are part of one S-curve, because I'm not sure if they fulfill the same function. So maybe they are. Yeah, so it's not really an alternative to the same. So what you see now is that there is kind of you have laptops and they turn into laptops turn into tablets. But I don't think it can actually be classified as an S-curve. An S-curve is mostly for like for different technologies that fulfill the same functions, like vinyl records versus CD, fax machines versus the internet, old-fashioned televisions versus new televisions, things like that. On the other hand, maybe tablets will take over laptops. So maybe there's a discontinuous S-curve in which tablets completely take over the laptop market. I don't know. If you're able to predict that, you will probably be very rich. But you kind of see that it becomes more integrated. If you look at Microsoft Surface, for example, it's basically a tablet, but also a laptop. So it's not really a discontinuous S-curve. So if you look at the different stages in the S-curve, this is called ferment, because then the innovation needs to, you need to invest a lot in the innovation before it can take off. Once it takes off, you can make a lot of improvements to the innovation and have a lot more sales of the innovation with relatively little effort. This is where you also see like a dominant design gaining. So the first smartphones were like all over the place. So they had all kinds of different layouts with buttons or ribbons or whatever. But then suddenly you saw, okay, we've made a lot of updates to phones, to smartphones, and now we see that, okay, basically this design works best. And that's why all smartphones now look alike, because it showed that in this stage that, okay, a design with icons and a number of icons at the bottom that are always available works best. And then finally, you reach the maturity phase, in which kind of the technology is, done. There are not much innovations to make, and the new innovations cost a lot of effort. And then you're about here, and then it's waiting for like a new technology to take off, which is a discontinuity and a new S-curve. And maybe, but of course, I'm not an expert, but I think maybe with like televisions, we're kind of here in the maturity stage, and it's waiting for a completely new technology to take over. And a completely new technology could be a completely new way of making televisions, or could be a completely new way of watching television. But if you look at regular LED displays, I think we're basically, or maybe here. So you have small innovations, but not anything serious. Okay, why is this useful? Well, this is useful because it helps organizations decide when and if to enter a new market, when and if to switch to invest in new production methods, when and if to invest in new innovations or technology, and when and if to abandon products. So as an organization, you can think for yourself, okay, what do I want? So for example, do I want to enter the smartphone market? Maybe the smartphone market is here. So maybe as an organization, it's wise to wait it out, to not invest and to wait it out until you have a new technology and then invest in virtual reality glasses or something like that. So it can also help you as an organization to think about, okay, what should we focus on? So if you are an organization which makes a product which is here, you should spend a lot of your money to track competing IPs, to track innovations, because the chances are there will be a new innovation which will disrupt your market. So maybe it's time to also start investing in alternative products or in newer technologies. Also, it may help you to decide when to abandon the product. So, okay, we as Philips have been making televisions for like 20 years. There's not much to gain in terms of innovation for television, so we're here. So we as Philips sell our whole television department to LG, which they have done. And then we start anew as Philips within the medical industry. So they start out anew here. But of course, it's easier said than done, because if you're an organization which makes an existing product or offers an existing service, it's very difficult to say, okay, we're gonna abandon everything and start a completely new thing. So it's what I said in the before the break in the previous lecture formally about how you can about how an organization wants to remain or keep doing what they're doing, and it's kind of resistance to change. So the S-curves may help you as an organization to decide what to do with your innovations or with other innovations, but of course it's difficult to do so in an existing organization. Okay, 2 minutes for the rest of the lecture. No worries, we'll pick it up at the next lecture, but let me start out with diffusion of innovation. I would say that I think that many of you have heard of the diffusion of at least know something about this diffusion of innovation model. That if you have a new technology, then you have certain stages of adoption. So in the first stage, you have innovators, so it's the people who start using a new innovation early on. Then you have early adapters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And an innovation diffuses across your market according to this process. So it starts out with innovators, then you have early adapters, then you have early majority, and finally you convince late majority, and then finally, or maybe never, you convince the laggards who adopt your technology at last. And diffusion of innovation is the process by which the innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of the social system. So I think we'll keep it here, and then next time we will discuss the oh, I see that the whole footers are wrong. And then next time we'll take it up from here. Yeah, the suggestion is maybe you record the rest of the lecture yourself, so the next lecture you can start with lecture 4. I still have the optimistic and probably unrealistic impression that next lecture is not there's not so much to tell about business models, so that I will so that I can make it through the next lecture. If not, I will record the rest of the lecture so we can start lecture 5 when we talk about a new topic, organizations internally. We can start that anew. So for now, I will continue the lecture, but if not, I will make a recording of the rest of the lecture and put that online. Okay? So for now, thank you very much. And next time we'll continue the diffusion of innovation discussion, and then we will discuss business models. So thank you very much, and thanks for the suggestion of recording the lecture. Okay, see you next week.